He's our Senior Director for Urban, Social, Rural, and Resilience, the global practice that brings together all of these topics and the confluence on them in terms of joint frontline solutions to our clients. Penny Lee, and she is our Chief Strategy Officer of 1776, which is an incubator of global technology startups with a focus on, which has about 500 startups to date, and with a focus on sustainable businesses. So welcome to everybody, and now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Kristalina Georgieva, who is our keynote speaker for this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us, Kristalina, and it's an honor to introduce Kristalina because these topics are really close to her heart on a personal level, as well as in her corporate function as the CEO of the World Bank Group, The agenda of women entrepreneurship, both in terms of the way that it impacts our ability to do development work at the front line with our clients, but also when I remember the messages that she delivered to the winners of the WeMena competition when they came in July, they really resonated. She met them in her office and personally spoke to them about her own journey as a woman leader, and I think that many of them came back to me personally asking about some of the quotes and some of the messages that she delivered. So Kristalina, thank you very much for being with us. Of course, the background that you have in working in the humanitarian space, in the development space over the years also allows us to hear from you. How do you see this agenda going forward for the World Bank? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ayat, and welcome to all of you who are in this room. On this panel, there are people who would bring incredibly interesting perspectives and experiences, and they all are rightly recognized for the work they do. I hope that Ms. Yassin, who I had the chance to meet as our first winner of the WeMena competition, would tell you a little bit about what can make her dance in the shower. We'll come to that, I'm sure. From my perspective, there cannot be a more important topic when we talk about the success in development, meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. Time and again, when I'm asked to choose one of the goals and stand up next to it, I would choose gender equality, goal number 5. And I would do it because it is so very obvious that if we are to prosper, if we are to have stable and secure societies, that has to be grounded on the shoulders of all of us, men and women. And unfortunately, even in the most developed countries, we're still falling short in tapping into the talent of all our people. And it is technically defined as gender gap, but it is actually a tremendous opportunity for women themselves to reach their full potential, for their families to have an anchor, for their societies to be richer and more productive. Let me start with the staggering numbers. When we talk about loss of not relying on women the way we rely on men, it is estimated to be between 12 and 28 trillion dollars. Even if we are to go to the lower end of that loss, just imagine what we are talking about in terms of prosperity cut short. And when we think of the reasons why this is the case, they are all reasons that can be addressed. One, to make sure that we have legal framework that puts men and women on equal footing. That right to land, right to property, access to education, to jobs, to credit, that men and women are equal in a very, very prominent and true sense. This is not the case. And actually, when we talk about legislative obstacles, I was pretty shocked when I looked at these numbers. In 155 countries, not in, you hear me correct, not in 15, not in 55, in 155 countries, there are legislative obstacles to women to be entrepreneurs. So we have to be determined to make sure that legislative obstacles for women to fully participate are eliminated. And that is where, for the World Bank group, the work we do on the policy side on understanding why these obstacles are there, what would it take to charter a pathway to eliminating them, this work is so, so very important. Second, we have difficulties to get women to be entrepreneurs also because of us women. I don't know about you, but in my own professional life, there has not been a single step up that would not happen by me being dragged up for my hair. My first question, if I'm offered a bigger and brighter opportunity, my first question would be, who is better than me? Why me? I mean, there must be somebody else that is more deserving. And that is so typical of women, that we need to look around this table, look at ourselves and say, hey, it is time to overcome that mental block. I don't know whether it is genetic or it is a result of tradition, but it is there and it is for us to take out. Men can help, but it is for us to fix it. And actually, that takes me to my third point, that we have to recognize that in this reality, when there are objective obstacles and there are subjective obstacles, there has to be a special push for women to succeed. In other words, we have to recognize that being fair to women means to lean forward towards them a little bit more. And that is in terms of access to finance. It is quite disturbing that, according to our colleagues in IFC, women-owned SMEs face $300 billion shortage of finance for their enterprises. It is in terms of the type of holistic support we provide to women entrepreneurs. It's not just about the money, it is about managerial skills, connecting them to the supply chain, making sure that they are structurally helped to move up. Ms. Yassin here says if she goes to buy things, she goes on her own as a woman, and price, what happens to the price, Ms. Yassin? It goes up. So it all of a sudden becomes more expensive when she is the purchaser. So we then turn to men and other things, but maybe systematically we can identify where is it that push needs to happen. Call it whatever you want, call it positive discrimination, call it anything you want to call it, but do it. I found it, I was talking to a friend a couple of days ago, and I said, you know, it's very interesting. In my old age, I discovered that I am really a feminist. And actually, I am absolutely shamelessly talking about the need to give opportunities, to actually push for more opportunities for women. Because if we don't do it, it ain't gonna happen, or it is not going to happen fast enough. So here at the World Bank, we have made a commitment that we would have 50% women in senior management. I'm proud to say that we are one vice president short to reach at that level, of the level of vice presidents. So for now, the father of women has to compensate, to be acting for women. And we would go down the ranks. By 2020, we would have gender parity in management. By 2022, we would have gender parity in the technical ranks. And it is not because we don't like our men. We adore our men. They're smart, they're hardworking, they're wonderful. But because decisions are made better when men and women are together. And the productivity, the contribution of women in all walks of life has its own merit for society to be more prosperous. Let me finish by saying the following. We have gone a long way on many issues that are related to equality, including on this one. But we have definitely not gone far enough. And when we look at the map of the world, the MENA region, a wonderful place, is actually tugging behind all the rest. So if we are to concentrate where the opportunities coming from closing the gap are biggest, hey, MENA region is the place to be. I would like to welcome everybody who is here from whichever part of the world you come, and wish you all the success in what you do, and beg you to always look for a chance to mentor, to support, to encourage women. That applies to men, and I want to be again a little harder on us, and it applies to us women. My favorite quote of all times, it is from, I heard it from former Italian minister Emma Bonino. I'm told it belongs originally to Miss Albright, or Secretary Albright. My favorite quote is, "There is a special place in hell for women who do not help other women." We all want to go to paradise. Thank you. And I want to apologize. I will have to leave. That is very impolite. I normally don't do that. But I need to catch a plane and go to Canada. Canada being the country with feminist development policy and a prime minister who is a proud feminist, I think it's a place that you would let me go to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristalina. Very much. So we'll take our cue from Kristalina and move right into looking at the MENA region, the lagging region that is indeed having some of the lowest female labor force participation, only 22% of prime working age women compared to the global average of 58. There's also a gap of 9% representation at the political level, and then you look at the entrepreneurship space, and MENA region only has 14% of all SMEs registered for that are created by women, a much lower rate than, of course, for men. And women in MENA, as Kristalina mentioned, only receive 3% of all of the early stage financing that is available for entrepreneurship. So my first question is to our Vice President. Hafez, what is your assessment of these conditions in MENA? Why are women so underrepresented in the region, in the entrepreneurship space, and how do you see the future and the role of the bank in addressing that?
Okay, thank you very much, Ayat, and good afternoon, everybody. I'll have to tell you that, like my boss, Kristalina, in my old age, I've become a feminist. And I'll have to explain why. I mean, when I go and talk to the leadership in our region, to the different Arab countries about the need for gender equality, they tell me, oh, Hafez, you've spent too much time out there in the West, in the US, in Europe, and you have lost touch with the realities of our region. And I tell them, no, it has nothing to do with that. The reason I've become a feminist in my old age is purely economic, is that I have looked at the economic impact of gender discrimination of our region, and it is huge, both in terms of growth as well as in terms of equality and inclusion. Let me explain, and it is actually quite simple. As Ayat said, we have the female labor force participation rate in our region is 22%. Actually, that is quite optimistic way of looking at it, because the rate of unemployment of young women in our region is nearly 50%. So what does this mean? That means that only 11% of women in our region are working. Okay? Does this? But if you look at the other side, that so this is, we have 11% of women who are working, but on the other side, you have nearly on the education side, you have women are educated just as much as men. And actually, if you look at some of the universities in Tunisia, for example, you have more females graduating from universities than males. So that means that we in Middle East and North Africa are having our girls, taking them to school, teaching them, taking them to university, and then keeping them at home. Does this make sense? Of course not. I mean, so in order to bring about, Kristalina gave you the numbers about the GDP lost because of the lack of female participation. So you can imagine that if only, if we could just move from 11% of the women who are working to 50%, you can see the big jump in terms of production and income in the region. So just as being very, very hard-nosed economist, you have that. But there is another issue also, a bigger issue in our region, which has to do, if you look at the at our region, you see a lot of instability, a lot of civil strife and problems. And if you look at the causes of this instability, many of it are political and religious and whatnot, but there are also economic and social drivers of instability in the region. And I would say, according to most of our research, a key driver is lack of economic inclusion. So we talk about, we at the World Bank, we say, okay, we need to have growth, but we need to have inclusive growth. We need to have economic inclusion. When I go and talk to ministers or presidents in our region and tell them inclusive growth, they tell me, what does this mean? There's a very simple way of thinking about inclusive growth. Inclusive growth means expanding the middle class, having a bigger middle class and improving the standards of living of that middle class. Okay, that's a very simple way of thinking about economic inclusion. So our objective should be to expand the middle class in the Arab world. Let us look at the middle class around the world. If you look at a typical middle class family in the United States, it has 2 adults working, a man and a woman. In Europe, it's the same thing. In East Asia, it's the same thing. How can you create a middle class in the Arab world with only 1 adult working? You can do that if productivity of the Arab men is double the productivity of the American or the European or East Asian men. And from your reaction, I can understand that this may not be the case. So, that is why I have become a feminist. Because gender inequality has very strong negative implications for growth and development, and has very strong negative implications for economic and social inclusion, and therefore has negative political and implications in the long run of the region. So, what can we do about it? We obviously, it is at the center of all our work. It's something extremely important that we need to work on. Now, there are, I would say that there are at least three big reasons why we see gender inequality in our region. The first reason Kristalina talked about is the legal constraints that face women. In some of our countries, women are not allowed to borrow from a bank without the approval of their husbands. In other countries, women are not allowed to travel without the approval of their husbands. In other countries, women are not allowed to do this or that. So there is all those kinds of constraints on women that require, that should be resolved by through the fixing the legal framework. There are also a lot of, we have to be frank with ourselves. Society needs to evolve also. There's a lot of social constraints. I was doing a paper on, with a Japanese colleague actually, on gender inequality in Morocco. And one of the, when we were discussing with some of our Moroccan colleagues, they said, oh, it is religion that is the, Islam is the constraint. But my Japanese colleague told, I was thinking, yeah, maybe they're right. But the Japanese colleague said, no, it's not true. I've done the same study in other Muslim countries. I did the same study in Malaysia, which is also where they're also Muslims, and that is not, and they don't face this constraint. So it is not really the religion, it's the way it's applied, it's the way society is organized. So we need to deal with that. And then another reason, obviously, is just that the economy itself is not organized to allow for more women to work. I mean, there are issues like childcare, dealing with the elderly, and so on, that need to be addressed in order to provide women with greater ability to work. So these are the kinds of problems that we need to deal with, and what we are doing in the bank, I guess, are two things. On the one hand, advocacy. So you have people like me saying, walking around saying, you see, I'm an Arab man, but I am a feminist. That is what I call advocacy. On the other hand, we also try in all of our projects to ensure that women are fully represented, and actually in many other projects try to actually target women. Like, for example, on this entrepreneurship work, one of the projects that that we are working on right now, and that is will be like I think a $300 million project, is to support women entrepreneurs in Egypt, so which I think will be great and will be an example of things that that we need to do. So let me leave you with one last point on positive discrimination in favor of women. And people tell me when I say, okay, we need to hire more women, we need to hire more women managers. People tell me, but you know, why are you doing this discrimination, and maybe they're not good? I say, well, we've been managed by incompetent men for a long time. Maybe some positive discrimination might be an improvement. So let me stop here. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Hafiz. So I'll turn it immediately to Yara so that she can tell us the voice and the viewpoint from the real world out there facing these obstacles. And Yara, you came up for an idea for your business. Tell us how you did it. What were your obstacles? And what has the WeMENA competition meant for you, and how do you see the future of your work, taking into account the realities that Hafiz just outlined for working in MENA and in Egypt in particular?
So good afternoon, everyone. I started the business Upfuse when I was graduating from university. I graduated from the German university in Cairo. We started it when we were in Berlin, in Germany. And we wanted to create an impact in our society. We wanted to create job opportunities, and we also wanted to have an environmental impact, because we can see that our beautiful city is not as clean as it should be. We didn't think of us being women starting a business in a younger age, like 21. I didn't think of that. And still I'm not thinking actually of being a woman or a man or anything. I am someone who's doing business. And this is maybe the first step that could make me eliminate the issues and the difficulties that really women in my region are facing. to think that I'm not a woman, or at least to think that I'm not being discriminated. Referring to what make me dance under the shower is when I actually won the WeMina competition. It was the first competition that Upfuse actually wins. And it was pretty good feeling to feel that someone appreciates what you're doing, believes in you as a person, before as a business, and wanted to invest time and money and also experience to make you grow and glow and become here with you, everyone. So this is something. And the other thing, talking about the social constraints. So in my region, in the MENA region, there are definitely social constraints that prevents women who have ideas or who want to support their families financially to become who they want to be. The social constraints comes within the family and what is the woman role in the society. So I don't think that in our society, referring to the Egyptian society, women are meant to work or are meant to be like a business leaders or has something that to do, being a leader. They sometimes are meant to be women of kids and lovely housewives, or maybe working from 9 to 5 just to support the family financially. But having higher hopes of really representing their countries, presenting their aims, doing something that could change the status quo of their country wasn't something in plan. Maybe I was lucky, and definitely I am, because I'm having a family who's very supportive and who didn't also see me as a woman who need to be married by 21 and have kids by 25 and stuff like that. They felt that maybe I am more or less special in the sense that I know what I really want to do. I love my profession as a product designer, and I wanted to have an environmental impact and a social impact in my country because I love it and I don't want to go anywhere else, to work anywhere else. I want to change my surrounding. And they just helped me. They helped me financially, and they gave me the space to be who I want to be, not to be what the society wants me to be. This is one thing. And regarding what you've been saying about the economical inclusion, I'm actually coming from a middle-class company. I'm coming from a middle class. I'm so overdone with companies. I'm coming from a middle-class family, or let's say upper middle class. But what was different compared to other middle-class families is that my family did not want me to be a higher class by working on anywhere else just to have a lot of money, but they wanted me to preserve where I'm coming from as a middle-class person with high education. So they really invested in education. And this is something maybe not everyone in the MENA region as a family would do, in the sense that if a family, like a father and a mother, I've seen this personally, they would invest in the man to go to the best universities, to go to Sorbonne, to go to, I don't know, Stanford, and so on. But when it comes to women, they're eventually going to get married, so you don't need this kind of certificates. But my family did otherwise. They felt that, regardless that I'm only child, but they felt that maybe education could actually help. Investing in education could actually help her have a better future. And I think they are, I'm very thankful to how open-minded they are, or how open-minded every family should be. Not to constrain the kids and bull her because she's a woman and she needs to get married, and underline it, needs to get married, needs to get married, needs to get married. This is something. Yeah. As for the company, like when we started Upfuse, the constraints that we faced in starting it in Egypt was actually the financials. It was a bit hard for us to, at the start, to be incubated by incubators or to be financially supported by the government to start the business, and also to be trained how to start a business. We, as co-founders, 2 women co-founders, we don't have any managerial background, we don't have any business background, we were product designers, and we are still product designers. So the push of teaching us how to create this, how to be an entrepreneur, was kind of lacking, and this is something I still want to add my voice, that this is, before supporting women in the Middle East by money, support them how to start a business, how to think out of the box, and how to believe that they can actually do it. Because believing in actually doing it and giving the know-how of doing it is one step, and then the money would definitely come. And this is exactly what happened to me when I won the WeMina. Another thing which is a bit was a struggle for us is that we had to ask for international support. So to have the know-how, I had to travel to Europe, to Germany again, so I can know how to start a social business. Because social business is also new, and it was somehow a little bit annoying that you need to travel so you can create an impact back home. So yeah, that's actually my simple story of 4 years of being a woman entrepreneur in the Middle East.
Thank you so much, Yara. So now we will move to the perspective of a government. And how do you see, Sundus, moving to you, how do you see programs, policies, and instruments that governments can put in place, have put in place, that have worked for helping people like Yara and entrepreneurs on the ground? And how can you see the role of the government and its institutions in doing that change, that bringing about a bigger middle class entrepreneurship spirit and all of that?
Thank you, Ayat. Hello, everybody. From a government perspective and policies, actually in Morocco, let me start from the gender part and then move to entrepreneurship. From the gender part, actually, we have made considerable reforms on including women, or more inclusive reforms for economic social development. And that happened actually in 2004 with the new family code. And, in theory, everything is equal for women and men. But unfortunately, when you look at the practice and the implementation of these laws or this legal reform, there is this social norms constraint. Or, you can call it actually tradition, you can call it cultural clashes, but there are still actually issues when it comes to implementation. And we try to go around it by, having some initiatives here and there, showing that actually women are participating more and more. And but from the entrepreneurship kind of perspective, the government is very much aware that is an alternative to employment today. I mean, job creation is very slow, and they are pushing more and more for this alternative. And that's why, you see a lot of ecosystems that are being put in place for incubators, accelerators, finance, etc. But then when you look at it again from the practical perspective, you see that the implementation is much harder. There's still a gender barrier. Be it for finance, women cannot have access to finance in a very, as men would, because there is, this trust issue with women when it comes to finance. And, since there is no legal framework or any constraint that the bank would extend to women like men, there is always this interest that is higher, or like they're asking for more guarantees or more collateral than it's supposed to be. And this is where it comes where we have thought about different vehicles for that, and what we call hybrid kind of financing, where actually the World Bank this year, and they have extended 50 million to the Caisse Garantie in Morocco, where they will act as a catalyzer to bring more private investors to put money into the entrepreneurship world, and mostly in the startup and innovation. And I think that is the future of startups and entrepreneurship in the region. It's bringing actually this money, this extra money, in the hybrid way to catalyze for more and more investors to come in. That could solve part of the access to financing problem, but there are actually two other issues that need to be solved. One is the training that we have talked about, which is the soft training and for women and men in general, but for women actually because probably women will feel much at ease if it was gender driven. It's if you put it as women with women, they will feel less intimidated than when you have a mixed kind of setting for training. And I think we should actually put more emphasis on that, and we don't have that in our part of the world. And the third point will be on mentorship. And the mentorship today comes from mostly it's weak. It's not very. It's not. You don't see a lot of mentors, investing their time on this kind of endeavors, but women will look up more into women than to men in this case, and I think we should probably incentivize more women to mentor and kind of take up this training for women and to encourage them into more entrepreneurship, like what Yara did and other. And I think that will actually solve this issue of intimidation and not feeling at ease when it comes to women entrepreneurship in the region. And to conclude actually on this initiative that is WeMENA and Women on the Rise, I think it's a good accelerator kind of platform. And I was talking about how they have done the whole process of finding the winners and getting these candidates from across the region and from Morocco. I think it's a good platform. It's a good initiative that we need to scale up, because that's the way the word to mouth, basically, what we have, word of mouth, that is the channel of communication in this kind of situations in our part of the world. And the only way that we can actually scale it up is by having this kind of initiatives. And I think that's it's a great challenge and opportunity for that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sundus. Actually, that's a great segue to turning it to Karen, who's going to bridge the two parts of the session by talking about the World Bank role in closing the gender gap and some of the programs and initiatives. WeMENA is one, but there are plenty of others, and how can we continue to grow that space in support of the gender agenda?
I'd like to thank Ayat and colleagues for organizing the panel, and thanks to my distinguished panelists. I'm really happy that I'm in a room that has as many men here as women, because this is your issue. It's not just a women's issue, as Hafez said. It's all of our issues. And so I'm really happy when I see men at the table. I'm going to do exactly what Ayat suggested, which is to talk a little bit about what the bank is doing, but I'm really pleased to follow Yara and Sundus in their comments, because I think what they said very nicely sets up what the rationale for what the bank is now doing in this space. I thought I'd start, well, let me tell you what I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with a really exciting new program that the bank was asked to set up by the governments of Germany and the United States and a host of others. It's called the WeFi, the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative. And it was launched in Hamburg at the G20 summit last July, and it will actually become operational this October. This is a facility. It's called a financial intermediary facility, so the mechanics of that is less important. The most important thing is that 13 governments around the world, very diverse, US, Canada, Norway, Denmark, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Canada, South Korea, Japan, have come together collectively pledging more than $325 million in grant finance that we will collectively work to leveraging to more than 1 billion. So the idea is to use this 300 million and to mobilize 800 million more in financing for female-owned or led SMEs. And this is a really important moment for this type of facility. It's the first of its kind, and it's rather unique in what it does. First of all, it's unique because its scale, its scope, its ambition. There's a lot of other smaller funds that are out there, but this is actually much bigger, and it brings it together. It's unique because it recognizes that for female entrepreneurs, like male entrepreneurs, but particularly for female entrepreneurs to succeed, you need an ecosystem approach. There's not a one-size-fits-all or one type of intervention only. And we know this from the impact evaluation literature. Approaches to support women, as our colleagues have said, must be multidimensional. They must target the access to finance gap. And if you'll permit me, I'd like to give you a little bit of context on that. As our colleagues have said, access to finance is really a central constraint to women's entrepreneurship. And as Kristalina has said, women-owned formal small and medium business owners face a $300 billion annual credit deficit. Now, the credit gap for male-owned enterprises, small and medium enterprises in MENA, is about $244 billion and about $50 billion for female entrepreneurs. But let's also set this in context, because in MENA, women only own about 14% of formal registered SMEs, compared with much higher rates of entrepreneurship in the neighborhood of 40% in other regions like ECA and Latin America. Now, there are very many differences in this credit deficit. The IFC, our colleagues have done some surveying, and the most recent survey in 2014 found that in the MENA region, 3/4 of the women business owners who were surveyed had sought external financing for their businesses sometime during the previous 12 months, so that was in 2013. 76% in Tunisia, 62% in the UAE, 59% in Jordan, but most did not receive any financing from a formal financial institution. I think that's something that we need to look at, and that's what this WeFi will talk about that in a minute. 55% of women business owners in Tunisia encountered an obstacle when seeking financing. For some, it was high interest rates. For others, it was the lack of collateral. So these are constraints that we need to, first of all, understand, but then we also need to target them. And they might face other constraints, like finding the process too complicated or being denied credit because of lack of a track record. There's also the type of financing. I'm talking about formal credit, but it's much harder for female entrepreneurs to find equity capital in addition to debt capital. So the importance of equity financing, particularly for the growth-oriented, the entrepreneurs that want to create jobs, is particularly important. And then on the other side, financial institutions, credit officers, sometimes, or not sometimes, frequently perceive women to be riskier, higher cost, and low return clients. And this negatively influences their appetite to women, regardless of whether the perception of higher risk is actually based on facts. We did an analysis of more than 2,200 enterprises that received SME finance from 34 IFC clients in 25 countries. And we found that female-owned SME clients were very often very well performing. They were up on their repayment rates, they had lower default rates, and they were the most overlooked market segments. So I actually think we have work to do among credit institutions, whether it's banks or other financial institutions, to change attitudes and perceptions about female-owned firms. Now, the financing constraint is only one constraint. There are other constraints that were mentioned in terms of capacity, mentoring, training. I want to mention two things that I think are important. One of the things that we know about female-owned firms, and this is true in MENA, is that they are they do have lower profitability than male-owned firms. Now, it's not because they're less efficient or they're less qualified as business owners, but sometimes it's because of the markets that they're in. They're in industries or occupations that are lower return occupations. And we're now starting to do some work to try to help women cross over into male-dominated sectors, which are higher return, higher value added for women themselves, and learning about what works to help women cross over. Of course, we have to work on enhancing the productivity and skill levels in the sectors that females traditionally have dominated. And as Hafez and Kristalina have said, there are legal and policy barriers. So this new WeFi, as we like to call it, is targeting these types of constraints. But as I mentioned, we're targeting them in a multidimensional way. The proposals that the multilateral development banks will be asked to present to the WeFi for this $300+ million in financing have to show an aligned public-private approach. In other words, understanding the regulatory and policy environment that exists, not just for SMEs, but whether there are special barriers that women-owned SMEs face. They have to show an understanding of the state of commercial finance or non-financial businesses. They have to look at where women are in the value chain of different sectors, as was suggested. So there has to be an aligned public-private approach, and approaches need to be multidimensional. And they have to be evidence-based, based on impact evaluation of what we know actually works for female entrepreneurship. And one of the things that we know about what works is it can't be business as usual and access to finance. So we're targeting SMEs. That means we need right-size finance. We need the right size of loans. We need to work around the collateral constraints. And we've done a lot of experimentation in different places about credit scoring, use of psychometric testing to help banks understand how they can better target this market. It's also not training as usual. You mentioned soft skills. There's a lot of work that we've been doing in countries like Togo and Malawi to show that personal initiative training is actually a much stronger determinant of female business owner success than standard business training like how to manage your inventories and look at sales. So this is really important for female entrepreneurs. And then finally, this new facility is going to be targeting innovation and learning. We have to have a learning agenda. We have to have a data agenda. We don't actually know a lot about female SMEs. And in MENA, this is a particularly data deficit or a data scarce region. We really need to have public sector and private sector collaboration to be able to understand what the universe of female SMEs are, what their performance is, what their growth trajectories are, and more importantly, how they're contributing to their economies. So I think in conclusion, we have great hopes for this new facility to bring together everything that we've learned, to be much more ambitious, to get to scale, and ultimately to really make a difference for women SMEs on the ground for their communities.
Thank you so much, Karen. And that indeed sets the stage for everybody in the room to be attuned, to stay tuned to this facility coming on board hopefully soon in October. And before I move to the next segment, I want to thank Hafiz, who also has a plane to catch. Thank you very much, Hafiz.
Going to Morocco.
Yes, exactly. He's going to the region. So let me take a cue from what was just mentioned by Karen around the market segments that women occupy, and by Yara around the thinking about women just occupying a 9-to-5 job versus being actually an entrepreneur. And entrepreneurship, especially high-growth entrepreneurship and innovation, often come hand in hand. So this next 15 minutes of our conversation, we are going to hear from 3 of our distinguished panel members around that space. What does it, how do we create the space for innovation and entrepreneurship to actually thrive? And in particular for women who, if you look at it, they control $29 trillion of global consumer spending. We know how to spend, as you know, but yet their preferences and needs in products and services often go unmet. So if we can actually do that match in terms of how women occupy that space, how do we support them, then perhaps we can unleash a lot of the entrepreneurship spirit that exists. So my first question is going to be for Penny. And your organization is world renowned for the work they do in incubating and supporting entrepreneurs. And innovation is part of, obviously, the work that you try to cultivate. So how do you pass on that mentality to entrepreneurs worldwide? Can you tell us about the role of having also gender-inclusive startup ecosystems and that promote innovation in your work, having worked in this spectrum for a number of years?
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having us here on the panel. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here today. You know, for those of you that don't know what 1776 is, it is a global startup incubator headquartered here in Washington, D.C., but with offices or campuses also in Crystal City, Virginia, New York, and in Dubai. But we also have we work and believe and truly believe that you shouldn't be limited by your geography to whether or not to be able to have the access to the resources that are needed to be able to become a high growth or just a growing entrepreneur. And so we also have a virtual platform, and on our virtual platform we have an additional array of startups in which we work with, but over 1,000 mentors. And by having the virtual platform, we were able to make connections throughout the world to be able to match maybe those that are going through some different, trying to solve for some complex challenges with the industry expertise from around the world. So that is one way in which we do, and it actually helps with on the gender neutrality of it, removing a little bit sometimes and having it more on a virtual platform instead of a live and in person oftentimes does take or brings the gender into a neutral area and be able to grow and have those thought moments with each other. So there's different things in which we try to do, and we also try to encourage the exposure of our startups. As was mentioned, we have over 500 startups both on our virtual and on our physical campuses. And we do know that all of the women entrepreneurs face the same challenges to financing, challenges to exposure. And a lot of that is not having that access to a pipeline, or, so much of this business is friend of a friend refers, and the friend of the friend refers what they know, and what they don't know gets often lost. And so trying to find ways and areas in which we can highlight and bring them to bear and to show them and have the exposure of what some of these most amazing women are doing to be able to solve for some of the most complex challenges that we have. I can point to an example of one of them that we have in our portfolio out of LA, and she started a company called Hop Skip Drive, and what it is a more secure Uber. She was she didn't want to put her kids in an Uber because she wasn't sure about the verification of the driver, and so she created her own company called Hop Skip Drive, in which it's a background check, it's an ID, there's a full secure, the mothers are able to, kind of monitor their children in a much higher safety way, or a safer way, which they felt safer. And so this has gone on, and she has just raised her Series B, and so she is really propelling and had tremendous growth over the last 18 months. But without pushing that forward and without giving her a platform in which to speak and to be able to help, take her to various VCs, she probably would have been lost into the system. So what we try to do both is understand that that there is that gap between who gets financed, especially on the gender side. As was mentioned, only 2% of the women entrepreneurs are actually getting financed. Only 7% of venture capitalists are actually women partners. So you just have a gap on what they're being exposed to. And there's not a lack of binder full of women, as was said once in a presidential campaign. I mean, there is just a plethora of women that are out there. And so we try to do that each on every one of our campuses, and plus on our virtual. We also have women tech meetups. We also have women cohort lunches. And people, have said, aren't you actually doing reverse discrimination because you're not allowing the men and isolating? But we also have found, as was mentioned, when they're in a group, there's shared pain points that that they have found more difficult as a woman, or there are shared things that they can both solve together as a collective group. So it's not that we're discriminatory against men, it's just that we also know that there's maybe a little additive boost that needs to occur for a woman entrepreneur, or for them to be able to be exposed to the right avenues and methods in which we can help them, really truly grow their companies. So many different programs in which we do. I can say at the incubator itself, we are over 60% women run. We do have a male boss and CEO, which is fine. He's great. He's fantastic. But I would say 60% of the composite. Also, and it is interesting. My background is in politics, and I got my first start with a woman who really did break a glass ceiling in Texas. It was a woman by the name of Ann Richards, who went on to win governor of Texas. And she really pushed envelopes in a lot of different places, but what it showed was with a strong voice and someone leading, a lot of people will follow. And so, we also have tried to encourage that and bring to bear, and find different and creative ways in which we can build. But I would say politics, I think, is actually ahead of the tech industry. There are much more gender equity and gender parity believe it or not, on the U.S. government side. I can say, having worked in it for 20 years, and hoping to bring kind of what we had to go through in the government, and a real focus and a real attention to go out and to really try to diversify your offices in every aspect, that hopefully the tech industry can come along and be on parity soon.
Thank you so much, Penny. That is really very inspiring. I'm going to turn to Luis Ross, and you are the Special Advisor on Innovation in the Office of the President of the Inter-American Development Bank. Some call you also IDB's Chief Innovation Officer. So my question is, what do you do when you wake up every morning with that title? It's very interesting. We don't have that title here, so give us the inspiration. But also, what do you think entrepreneurship, the role of entrepreneurship is in your region, in the Latin America region, and what does it have in terms of the role in economic development over the next 5 to 10 years? What's the perspective also on the role of IDB in that space?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and congratulations for hosting this incredible workshop around women entrepreneurs. The bank is fully committed to gender equality. I mean, this is something that comes very strong from the top, from the President's office. And for reasons that we have heard here, gender inequality is inefficient, right? You do not allow to unleash the full potential of public and private work in the region. But more important, because you also want to change the face of success in Latin America, right? I mean, we look at success and we all see males facing that. We want to really mix that and bring that example. So in that sense, when you look at what we have advanced in terms of Latin America, in terms of closing the gender gap on education at all levels, is significant. And that creates a good basis for the world that we are entering now, which is technology-driven and does require a talent that is well-trained. And we talked about training and the importance of training women entrepreneurs. So in that sense, Latin America is well-positioned to take full advantage of that digital revolution, particularly in the space of STEM. Right? And so in that context, we've been working and we set up a couple programs to support women entrepreneurs. And I'll talk about just 3 of them because actually we heard the diagnostic that is global, but is also very true. I mean, the women don't have less access to capital, right? I mean, they are in sectors that grows less, food and beverage and manufacturing, and male entrepreneurs are in the internet, in software, and all this. So we've seen this across the board. The question is that how an institution like the IDB can use the tools that we have to support that, right? So we did 3 things that I think it's incredible. First of all, we created a program called Demand Solutions. Demand Solutions, the intention was to identify entrepreneurs who are tackling some of the most pressing issues for Latin America: health, education, transport, mobility, etc. Identify them in Latin America, be it men or women entrepreneurs, and bring them to refresh the IDB in terms of how do we look for solutions. We tend to be very inward-looking in these multilateral institutions, and so the idea with Demand Solutions is to say, what is out there? What are the entrepreneurs? What are the frontier solutions out there that we do not incorporate, either because they are too small, because they are at the startup phase, and we created that match in between solutions and some of our client governments, right? So this is one effort, and it's interesting because of all the editions of Demand Solutions, all of the winners are women entrepreneur and are in the technology sector. So it wasn't by design, but it happened that way, right? The second effort that we did, which I think it's incredible because it addressed one of the most difficult challenges for small medium entrepreneurs in Latin America across the board, is to procure from government, right? And so how do you participate actively in government procurement or trade opportunities? So even exporting to a neighboring country in Latin America is very hard to understand the legislation, the regulation, all the rules. So we created a platform that we call Connect Americas to Women, woman-owned business. And so what we do there is really to offer them training in several areas, but more important, we plug with Google, Amazon, DHL, all these big players who procure also their products and solutions there. And so we taking advantage of the innovation world that we live in and the digital platforms, and created a very powerful platform that actually can serve all this. And the third program that I find incredible, and it's led from someone who is a tremendous supporter of women entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, she's not here with us, Susana Robles. We created a platform called WeExchange, particularly to address some of the issues that we have been seeing. I mean, how do we mentor women entrepreneurs? How do we help them to access other entrepreneurs in peer-to-peer learning, right? I mean, how do we bring all of them together with angel investors and, you know, with the chain of finance that is needed in their growth process? And we have supported over 1,000 entrepreneurs. And we host summits, and the next one is in Chile, Santiago, Chile, on December 4th and 5th of this year. And it's incredible because it started off as a small program, but just took off. And it's for women, designed by women, you know, it's just all women entrepreneurs, and there are, of course, a couple, you know, guys in there invited to speak. But the context is a bit what you guys just refer. There's a cultural element to it, in a sense that, you know, we engage and we learn from each other in a peer-to-peer. And I think this is a very powerful platform that could be replicated in other parts of the world. And last, and it's great to have Yara here as an entrepreneur. I wish we could have our Peruvian entrepreneur here, who is Mariana Costa. And she runs a program called, actually she's a social entrepreneur. And recently, I mean, not so recently, but Obama brought her here to have a panel with Mark Zuckerberg and some other entrepreneurs. So she was awarded globally for the work she's been doing. And she's basically looking at young women from low-income background and train them on coding. So look at that. She's looking at, you know, women at low-income, you know, backgrounds and take them all the way to the markets where you just referred to. They are most profitable, which is the technology ones, and teaching coding. And we're supporting them with just $1 million that went so long in terms of impacting this. It's a network of companies now, over 300 companies. They're in Mexico, they're in Peru, and I think in Bolivia as well. So it's just an incredible solution that this young entrepreneur, Peruvian one, that just took it on herself to say, we're gonna train young women on coding, and we're gonna find them jobs. Guess what? The ratio, 70% of this young woman trained in laboratory get a job at the end. So this is an incredible, powerful example of a young woman entrepreneur targeting, you know, young women entrepreneurs, train them and find them jobs. So this is just a kind of a sense of what the IDB has been doing in this space. We are very excited about it. And as I say, as we move in the digital revolution, as we enter this new space, having an educated basis of young women in Latin America is a huge asset for us to take full advantage of that transformation in the region. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Luis. I'll now turn it to Ede, and many of these high growth, high opportunity entrepreneurship ventures happen in some of the world's largest cities. And your practice, the practice you lead, is a confluence of social development, urban development, and resilience. And so in that sense, how do, at the same time, these cities, these largest cities, face a lot of vulnerability, risk, and require a lot of programs to address some of the resilience aspects, whether it's to disasters, financial shocks, or other risks. We heard from Yara. Yara works in the urban environment to do recycling and address some of the city problems, at the same time looking at entrepreneurship. So how do you see the role of our practice in addressing and supporting this space, and what's the role of city governments in fostering innovation?
Thank you, Ayat, and great to be here. Look, when the team came with the idea of doing women, and we were brainstorming about how to focus this, and they said, we're gonna focus on resilience. And my initial reaction is like, that doesn't seem like the first topic to pick up. And then it took me a couple of minutes to realize that actually it is a really exciting topic for that. Because remember, there are not only all these barriers about financing and all that, but there are very male-dominated sectors that are super difficult to come into as women entrepreneurs. And resilience has an interesting set of dimensions that I wanted to discuss with you. So first, a couple of anecdotes on this topic, and just to describe what we think about when we think resilience. The natural image when we think of resilience is what we see in the news these days, the issues of natural disasters, of households, communities, societies being hit by these disasters and figuring out how to bounce back. And turns out that women are far more impacted by natural disasters than men. Did you know, for example, that many more women died in the Indonesia tsunami in Aceh than men? And that's when we began to realize that there's something different here. And what was different was that women were part of the caretakers, and therefore they were not able to escape the forces of the tsunami and the disasters as fast as men, and therefore there were many more women who died into this process. And that's in developing countries, but that's also in developed countries. I was sitting down with some government officials in Japan, learning about the great tsunami there. And actually, Japan is the best country in terms of preparedness and resilience to natural disasters. But they said, look, one of the big problems that we had was that most of the heads of shelters of preparedness for disasters were men. And therefore, they were the ones in the end deciding what do you find in shelters. And the women here, I'm sure, will never let your husbands pack for vacation. I personally have no clue what to do because we don't think in those dimensions. And therefore, when all the populations came here, women is like, really? And therefore, it is this type of perspectives and the impacts that shocks, natural disasters, insecurity, risk have on women means that they're actually think differently in households, in communities, in societies at large. So Penny, the example that you gave on the upgraded Uber, actually it is a resilience measure that only a women would think of as a new business opportunity, because those are the kind of risks that they think through and are faced in very practical ways. So after a couple of minutes of thinking about that, I said, hey, actually resilience is the topic to start figuring out how to open up opportunities, because we want to deal with finance opportunities, mentoring and the like, but sometimes exploring opportunities on resilience becomes important. And at the same time, we were here in the World Bank in the middle of thinking about the expansion of resilience, or from a very traditional focus on natural disasters to one that also includes shocks of different kinds to, again, to families, to communities, to societies. And shocks all the way from violence, including gender-based violence and conflict, insecurity and risk, food price shocks, health shocks, all of those perspectives by which whether a family and a society is better prepared to deal with these shocks, but also once the shock happens, how fast and better prepared are you to bounce back? And therefore, we were very excited to get a lot of these proposals and ideas, because what we also find is that we tend to think of the preparedness and the response to these shocks as a public government, a public sector responsibility. And to a certain extent it is, but we have seen in country after country is that it is the families and the private sector who are able to move faster, who had the innovation, who had the ability to think about those topics and respond a lot faster. So we see tremendous opportunities in entrepreneurship to open up and to find solutions that are not only just the fancy big infrastructure and the dikes and the protection, but it's really the preparedness and the processes and the systems, the expanded Ubers, these kind of processes to increase the resilience of families, of communities, of societies as a large. Because I think that that's an area for tremendous growth. That's an area where we believe that we may have a unique perspective and advantage of long traditions into this process, and therefore have that sense of what works and what doesn't work into this process. And I'll come back to Japan, where actually many of you may know when you go to Japan and you check in the metro what's the most efficient way and the faster way to move around the metro from place to place, and what wagon do you need to ride in line 7 to transfer to line 2 faster and with easier access for either persons with disability or with children in strollers. And actually, it has been a tremendous business that developed out of that, which was developed by a woman who had to deal with the fact that there's not enough time, that there's strollers, that there's more stairs that they need to tackle, and therefore that perspectives open up opportunities for solutions that are there to this. So we were super excited, and I'm glad that the team began to do the connections between topics within our team that were not connected. We have teams that focus on social inclusion and perspectives of how to make sure that we break barriers of exclusion, not only by governments, but also by societies. Our teams that are working on preparedness for natural disasters, but also our teams that are figuring out in all kinds of risks for families and societies on conflict, in violence, in all these perspectives. And therefore, super excited to this process. Couple of minutes on perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have another panel, and we had planned a break. So I want to invite you to 5 minutes of a break so that we can switch around to the next panel, but stay around. We have a number of social entrepreneurs, startups, and a very interesting discussion coming up. And hopefully we'll also have a chance for an interaction, including with some of our current guests. Thank you.